Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before we start with our special guest, want to make sure everyone goes to Facebook, joins us on Facebook, on Twitter. Look for me, Gabriel Buelna, on Instagram, and on YouTube. Just go ahead and subscribe. A few days ago, we had an interview with Dr. Sandra Salazar, but today our special guest is Father Gregory Boyle from Homeboy Industries. Welcome, Father Boyle.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much. So, right now, can you tell us where you are physically? What are you doing?
I'm in my Jesuit community here in my room, and just on house arrest like every geezer in the country.
So, are you okay? So, what did you call it? You said house arrest, not quarantine, but you're in house arrest, Father Boyle.
Well, yeah, I mean, like,
are we being a little over dramatic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my provincial superior and my Jesuit superior, there are two of us who are 65 or older. We're actually both 65. So we can't leave the house for anything. So no shopping, no. So the youngins kind of do all that stuff. So I don't know. I call it house arrest.
Well, Father Boyle, just speaking for everyone out here, we're glad that they're doing that, and we're glad that you're in house arrest, as you call it. For those of you who don't know, I've known Father Boyle for about 25 to 20 years, so sometimes we joke around. So, Father Boyle, Dr. Falchi, who I kind of call probably the most honorable person in America and probably our leader right now, this morning he stated that he would not be surprised if he saw 100,000 deaths.
Well, obviously, it's a horrific thing to imagine. He said 100,000 to 200,000. The president said that it was what success looks like. We'd be doing a good job if we kept it at 100,000, which kind of boggles anybody's mind. So, we need to do what we can do to flatten the curve and mitigate this as best we can as citizens, and to put pressure so that everything gets delivered in terms of protective, gear and ventilators and hospital space and all the things that need to get done at some other level than the level at which we all operate. But in the meantime, we stay safer at home.
So, Father Boyle, in your career, you've experienced a lot of death and dying, just as being a priest. So that means LA will likely experience death at a scale not seen in any of our generation. As a person that's dealt with grief, what kind of advice would you give just citizens, just all of us, in terms of not just here in Los Angeles, but all over the country that's experiencing it right now, New York City more than anyone? How should we deal with that?
Well, I think everyone needs the whole task of life is to figure out and to come to accept and embrace the idea that we're all going to die. A homie named Moreno who was killed, and his brother had died a couple years before him and died in his arms, and he said death is a punk, and so I don't know, we're always needing to put death in its place. And this is horrific, and especially since we're our two commodities were time and truth, and neither of them were respected by the leadership in this country. So there are all these things to lament, but death is no exceptions will be made. So people need to, if death is the worst thing that can happen to you, wow, you're going to be toppled by life. And so it's important, to put death in its place, and so that death has no power. And it's certainly not more powerful than the sense of community and kinship that we're invited to and occasionally celebrate and find joy in. So death is horrific, but that's the whole point of life, is to kind of come to terms with it.
So thank you very much. But I got stuck on death as a punk. So for not just on that, but for young people right now, I mean, with starting college, and I mean, you worked with youth a long time, and there's that interruption that's happening right now in their life, and some of them might say that it's not fair. How how do you get through that hump?
Well, I think, the challenge always is to find the thing that's more powerful than death. And there are endless things that are more powerful than death. So, that's just important. And, this comes once in a century where we have, kind of a health crisis like we are now, where it looks like more people will die from this virus than all our wars put together. And still, people need to find, the truth in kinship and connection, and our sense of belonging to each other, and how we can still ventilate the world with tenderness. All that stuff, that's where meaning lies, not in this career that's about to unfold. Who knows? I think this time could really be a reset on life as we know it, and somehow it could usher in some very spacious, expansive new way of seeing that's kind of exciting, oddly. And so if it's all lament, then I suspect we're not seeing correctly.
So you've mostly dealt with the formerly incarcerated. How do you think the formerly incarcerated right now are dealing with the situation that might be a little different from the overall population?
Well, so I work with gang members, and so we have some 500 folks who have now been, our doors are closed. We call it a pause. All our 300 trainees are our case managers are keeping in touch with them and trying to support them every day, and our therapists, and so I'm madly texting people, homies, to just kind of keep them connected. And so and then folks get out and are texting me, and I just got out of prison. I said, well, let's wait till we're not all stuck in the house. And that day will come. A homie texted me the other morning, said, good morning, Pops. And he said, we're one day closer to normal, which will always be true. We'll always be one day closer to normal. And I found it kind of, it enhanced my day and kind of elevated my spirit, because it was a hopeful, optimistic thing, and utterly true. This too will pass, and we'll be on our way again. And even if things are unalterably altered, we're still going to be human beings who have the capacity to hold each other and be tender and to love without measure and without regret. We can do all those things no matter what comes.
So, Father Boyle, you give mass, or you, when you weren't quarantined or under house arrest, as you would say, you would give mass every Wednesday evening, right? At Dolores Mission?
Well, I do mass at Dolores Mission at 5 in Spanish, but my parish is, detention facilities in the county. So jails, probation camps, juvenile halls.
Right now, how are the undocumented, you think, potentially faring compared to the rest of the population? Because I know Dolores Mission serves a large undocumented population, and you've worked in that community.
Well, obviously they're harder hit because they can't have access to anything like unemployment checks. So, and they're kind of reliant, like a lot of people in our economy, to hustling up jales, jobs here and there, and so it's more difficult. Our shelter continues with as much moderation as and modification as we can come up with in terms of social distancing, and even spreading the cots uh, in the church kind of at a greater distance from each other. So we're still feeding them and we're still housing them, and their struggle is obviously more difficult because nobody is continuing to pay them or sick leave or any of that stuff.
So, Father Boyle, and we'll get to some of the questions on how people can help in a bit. So, in terms of Washington, D.C. just passed a $2 trillion package. How do you think the relief package is going to affect the families that you're dedicated to helping?
Well, my hope is that somehow nonprofits will be able to get, small business loans, if you will, and that are forgivable ultimately. And I don't know how we're gonna, it's gonna be difficult to survive. I mean, we're obviously gonna take a big hit. In a week or two, we were supposed to have our Lo Maximo fundraiser, which brings in $2 million. And so without that, I mean, our shortfall is going to be considerable.
So right now, if someone watching this could help Homeboy, by the way, have you furloughed most of your employees? Are you still paying them? How are you dealing with that?
We're paying all the trainees, and at some point we'll probably have to ask some of our senior staff to go on unemployment.
So if someone wants to help Homeboy Industries, how would they do it?
Write a big old check to Homeboy Industries.
What's your website address?
Homeboyindustries.org.
Got it. So thank you, Father Boyle. So in your career, you've worked with a lot of working class Latino families, correct?
I suppose. I mean, I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city for 6 years, and after that, I've been working with gang members. So I've been in Boyle Heights for 35 years.
So the Biden campaign seems to have had a hard time connecting with Latino voters, and what advice would you give, let's say, the Biden campaign or any campaign in terms of reaching out to Latino voters? Because more than anyone, you've dealt with working class Latino communities. What advice would you give them on the issues and communicating with them?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're in the oddest time imaginable, so hard to even imagine a convention, much less a campaign. So I think the human issues are really just the things that matter. People want to be able to get health care and send their kids to school and have them be safe in the streets and have enough food on the table, and they don't want to have to choose between paying their rent or feeding their kids. So these are all basic human things. I'm not sure they have even a special Latino cast to them, except for the fact that human beings are involved here, and we're all born wanting the same things, every single person. And once we kind of realize that, there's a campaign, I think it's over now, but it was for the Department of Mental Health in LA County, and big billboards and such. And it said, none of us are well until all of us are well. And so that's a pretty good motto, I think, generally speaking, that until everybody has access to the things that improve the quality of our lives, from education and healthcare and food security and all the rest of it, none of us are well until all of us are well. So nobody can be left behind. And all the while, we need to imagine this circle of compassion and dismantle the barriers that exclude people from it.
So and I'm not advocating for any of the campaigns, but it was interesting that the Bernie campaign seemed to trigger something in Latino youth specifically, where Latino leadership seemed to not get. Is there some insight as to why Latino youth wanted to go with Bernie? Is there something about their future that regular politicians, elected officials aren't getting?
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of, in many ways, people were saying that Bernie, kind of had the youth vote, and yet he didn't seem to have it, in the last two outings. So who knows? I just think I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's a healthy thing for us to get too rarefied here, and to kind of, the more we can keep it, we're all connected, we all belong, we all want the same things. So how do we make that more equitable? Otherwise, I'm not sure what the special concerns are. I think when we go there, we forget what the common concerns are. And I think that's where people need to be.
Thank you. So at its inception, Homeboy had a slogan, "Jobs, not jails." But I've been watching your kind of video cast, and so you've adjusted, and you've called it healing communities. What's the judgment from jobs to healing communities? Can you explain that to the public?
Well, jobs not jails, I guess, was kind of a later thing. Even prior to that was nothing stops a bullet like a job. So we were job centric. And then, we realized that an employed gang member might go back to prison or not, and an educated one may or may not. But then we came to this absolute guarantee that a healed gang member will not ever go back to prison, period. And that guarantee has never faltered for me. But that's a new thing. We're 32 years old as an organization, so somewhere in midpoint. I think in the early days when we listened to gang members, they said jobs. But once we knew gang members, we said healing. And so that was kind of key. The depth of our organization's knowledge of who these folks were led us to a place of fostering a community of tenderness and if a traumatized person will traumatize people, well, a cherished person will find the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So that's kind of where we went, and we haven't looked back. We feel like it's the right way to proceed.
So there probably isn't any other person that has spoken in all types of venues to young people. What's the best way for older folks, and I'm now 47 and you're not, but you are able to communicate with young people. What's the lesson that you can give people, especially right now where, whether we like it or not, we all have to communicate with each other? And what are some of the best practices that you've seen that could really help us?
Well, I don't ever think it's about advice. I don't think it's about communicating to people. A gang member who works in the streets of Houston had been in prison, pleaded with me after a talk I gave there and said, how do you reach them? Meaning gang members. And I found myself saying, for starters, stop trying to reach them. I don't think we should be about reaching young people. It's about folks allowing themselves to be reached by young people. And that's what turns everything on its head. Suddenly everybody is inhabiting their own mutual nobility and dignity just because you shut up, you listened, you waited for the answer, you valued what they were going to say, you allowed them to alter your heart. That's what works. But if somebody comes to me and they say they have a message that young people need to hear, I go, wow, come back when you don't have that message. I'm not interested in that message. I'm interested in your ability to receive people and to allow yourself to be reached and have your hearts altered forever. That's what young people need. They don't need a real good message.
Thank you. So if you're right now, I think young people, but they do have an opportunity to affect the national dialogue or narrative as to what whoever the next administration. What advice would you have for young people for them to communicate their issues to those who would want to listen?
Well, Donald Trump got elected, and then the very next day, young people were protesting in the streets of Seattle or wherever it was, and then they asked people who were protesting if they had voted, and they said no. And I go, well, then I don't. You've lost your right to protest if you didn't vote. So I mean, that's sort of the minimal. Boy, if you stay home on this next one, shame on you. And I don't want to hear you if you'd stayed home. I mean, it's like, yikes. People have to vote. So I don't want to say I don't care how they vote, but I do want to say you got to vote.
So if you deal with gang members, and gang members in a lot of situations lose the right to vote, can you clarify that?
Yeah, but we're very much on top of that in terms of gang members and felons are eternally disqualifying themselves, and often they need not. So once they're off probation and parole, and there are ways to increase that number, and so we do that. We have a whole team who has a table in our reception area who try to get homies to know that if they can vote, to make sure that they do. But obviously, the disenfranchised community needs to be more and more welcomed in, and there can't be any obstacle whatsoever for anybody to vote. So that's the common good says, no obstacles. Everybody should vote. Everybody should have an easy path to do that.
So, Father Boyle, let me be very clear. Is there a moral obligation for every single homie, LA or across the country, especially in those swing states, to vote?
Yeah, I think I think it's a responsibility of anybody who is able to vote to vote.
So the other day in one of your videos, you said you're not at Homeboy Industries. You're not a member. You're part of our family. Can you tell us what you meant by that?
Well, there are certain organizations and clubs, I guess, where they're card-carrying members. And I think everybody can see the difference between that and being a brother and a sister and kin, and being connected as a member of the family. So, that kind of community that can receive people. I mean, at our place, folks come in barricaded behind a wall of shame, and only tenderness can scale that wall. So you want them to feel safe, and then you want them to surrender to their own healing, and then to an ability to allow folks to hold them, and that they can experience that being cherished, which is life changing.
So right now, how and we talked about it a little earlier, but how do you think what does the general public need to know about nonprofit organizations like Homeboy, and you've started other organizations like Break the Pastoral, Dolores Mission Alternative, and how should the public view or help or communicate with not just the nonprofits I've just mentioned, but the thousands nationwide in order for them to survive? Or maybe I'm framing it wrong. Can you help me here?
Well, it's going to be tough. I mean, there's just no way around it. Everybody's going to take a hit, and then there's going to be prioritizing. Um, for my money, there are prisons and people are going to get released from them. And if society doesn't somehow have an exit ramp for them, then it won't matter how well we rebuild our economy if streets aren't safe and there's so much more exacerbated despair. So, I think Homeboy has a kind of a pivotal role with that population. No other place, I don't think, welcomes in the same way, with the same volume as we do. So you're going to want to protect Homeboy, I think, and keep it thriving and robust, because it matters in LA County.
So the coronavirus and the pandemic and all us, how do you think potentially the being in self quarantine and one, in working with Jesuits before, I've heard the language of, look, you have to discern. So as we're taking a lot of time onto ourselves, how does, and as a priest, how would you guide some of us to maybe do a lot of discernment and maybe come out of this pandemic maybe a little different?
Well, there's been nothing like this, in terms of being an equalizer. Pope Francis says, we're kind of in a storm, but we're all in the same boat, that doesn't happen. Even in this country, when 9/11 shaped us and altered life, but it happened in specific places that had impact on other places. But or Katrina hits, New Orleans, and our heart goes out and we open our checkbooks. But we're in LA. But now this is a thing that, in my lifetime, I'm 65. I've never seen anything like it. Find a place in the world that's untouched by this virus. You won't be able to. So there's that. And then there's also, and we're connected and we're linked to each other and we're sharing a common suffering and we're in the same boat. And so there's something about that that's utterly unique and an opportunity.
Is there any experience that you've had in these last few weeks that's been the best, that you could tell us how someone has handled it, or that you could say, wow, they're looking at the situation in a better way than I have?
Well, I'm on lockdown, so I'm not having a lot of contact or no contact outside the house. But every day, I'm just kind of blown away by homies and homegirls who have one concern, and that's kind of, how are you doing? That kind of thing, So I have a whole bunch of dearly deporteds who are homies who have been deported after having done a prison term and sent back to the countries where they were born, even though in many cases my Spanish is better than theirs. But a homie I hadn't heard from in a long time, he emailed me, and he's in Tijuana. And with big letters in the email, all it said was, "We are your mask." And that was it. And I hadn't heard from him in months. And what it meant was, I think, we got you. We're thinking about you. You're in our hearts. It's like, we will protect you. We're there for you till the wheels fall off, which is an expression the homies use. It's extraordinary, especially coming from a guy in Tijuana who I can only imagine life is exponentially more difficult there than in Los Angeles. And yet he has one concern, me, and am I okay? And he's kind of stretching his arms around me, and it's extraordinary. And then it makes you want to be expansive in the world. It makes you want to somehow envelop others, and you want to be loving centered, and you find the truth of who you are, that you find your true self in loving, thanks to some homie deported and now living in Tijuana.
What does the other side look like? You know, people say, you know, see you on the other side. What does it look like? How does, yes.
A homie texted me the other day, is see you on the other side. And I went, what are you talking about? Are you talking about death? He goes, oh no, when this is all over. I said, well, okay, better. I don't know. I mean, I believe in a God who is too busy loving us to have any time left for anything else. A God who loves us without measure and without regret. I'll give you an example. A homie who happens to have a job. He worked for us many years ago, and he's one of those essential people because he's in a factory that makes masks, and in Riverside. And so he emailed me. He said, you know, I was driving home from work on the way to see my wife and my daughters, and I was overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude. I was just filled with joy and peace, and I was going to thank God for this when God beat me to the punch and thanked me for allowing myself to be loved. Well, I thought, wow, this is a homie, did time in prison, was a meth addict. And I'm not sure in my lifetime I've heard a better notion of who God is, who beats us to the punch and thanks us for allowing ourselves to be loved. Well, I mean, that's huge. And there's nothing more consequential in our world, I don't think, than our notion of who God is. And if our God is puny and tiny and petty, well, we're going to be the same. But that was a notion of God that was spacious and huge, the God who loves us without measure and without regret. I'm having what he's having.
So, Father Boyle, a few years ago, I interviewed you and got you in a little trouble. Is there anything that you would like to say that might get you in trouble?
I'm too old to get into trouble. I don't care anymore about anything like that, you know. But no, I don't want you to repeat the trouble you got me into.
So in what would to close, what would you like to say to the audience that listens to this, that in final statement, and also how they can help Homeboy Industries get through this time?
Well, you know, because we run 9 social enterprises, we need customers, from our restaurants to our bakery to our electronic recycling. So when the dust settles, and it will, we'll need customers. But we always need money because we're a training program, and there's no place on the planet Earth where more gang members go to redirect their lives, and that matters in our county. And I think consequently, we have a singular impact on public safety in this county, and we'll continue to do that if people support us. So
I know I said that was the last question, but one more. One thing that I know from knowing you for a long time is that, you know, supporting gang members was something that is, you know, funded by government and generally accepted, but you fought an uphill battle on that. But Homeboy is now a worldwide organization. How are you guys handling that?
Well, we're worldwide in as much as we have the global Homeboy network. So we have some 147 programs in the United States and 16 outside the country, all modeled on our methodology. So we gather every August. I hope we still will this August. And we bring all our partners together, some 400 people who are engaged in this work. And it's not all with gang members, but it's with folks on the margins, homeless and mentally ill and returning citizens. So we kind of, there's a methodology that we embrace that we're happy to share best practices with when we gather. So, but it's not like the old days. The old days were death threats, bomb threats, and hate mails. So we can at least be heartened that we've made progress.
Father Gregory Boyle, Homeboy Industries, Jesuit priest, Dolores Mission, thank you very much. It's an honor. Be safe, Father.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Hey there. Like us on Facebook, share it, embed the video into the blogs, subscribe on YouTube to Buelna News, follow us on Instagram and on Snapchat. Thank you very much. Lots of content to come.